Hi, my name's Dana,
And I'm Rita.
and we'll be doing our presentation on MAiD in rural and remote communities. Some topics for discussion include Bill C-14 and its involvement in the legalization of MAiD. We'll also be talking about eligibility for MAiD, barriers to rural access to MAiD in Canada, and efforts in providing MAiD to these communities.
Bill C-14, also known as MAiD, was passed in June 2016. Canada's criminal code now exempts doctors and nurse practitioners who provide or help to provide MAiD. MAiD, medical assistance in dying, means the administering by a medical practitioner or nurse practitioner of a substance to a person at their request that causes their death, or the prescribing or providing by a medical practitioner or nurse practitioner of a substance to a person at their request so that they may self-administer the substance and in doing so cause their own death. Eligibility for MAiD includes that individuals must be at least 18 years of age and capable of making healthcare decisions. Applicants must also have a grievous and irremediable medical condition, which is incurable and in an advanced irreversible state. Once approved, Canadians are required to have a 10-day reflection period unless death is imminent or in a critical condition. Finally, individuals must have the capacity to provide consent for the MAiD intervention immediately before they receive the medication. Fun fact, worldwide euthanasia is legal in 7 countries: Canada, Luxembourg, New Zealand, Belgium, Spain, the Netherlands, and Colombia.
Next, we'll be discussing rural access to healthcare services in Canada. Almost 18% of the Canadian population lives in rural communities. They are served by only 8% of the physicians in Canada and only 11% of registered nurses, including nurse practitioners. Currently, there are not enough NPs in practice to ensure adequate healthcare for all rural patients. Just to demonstrate the prevalence of MAiD in Ontario, in the first 10 months of 2018, MAiD accounted for approximately 1.5% of all deaths in Ontario.
Barriers that remote communities face receiving MAiD in Northwestern Ontario. Northwestern Ontario is the province's most sparsely populated region, with 65 First Nations in the region. The Northwest Local Health Integration Network, LIN, is responsible for the entire region. It is further divided into 5 sub-regions in an effort to better identify and respond to the population's health needs. Guaranteed access to MAiD might be biased for the marginalized and rural and isolated communities given their lack of support resources. Rather than discussing barriers to equality and accessing MAiD there, should we not first eliminate the barriers to accessing comprehensive healthcare, including diagnostic and pain management in those communities? There is a growing concern within the palliative care community, especially in rural and remote regions of the country, that a lack of access to palliative care might instigate use of MAiD because there's no viable other option.
Physicians in rural communities. A number of physicians recognize that culture plays an important role in healthcare in Northwestern Ontario, and that perhaps MAiD is incongruent with some of the Indigenous beliefs, which results in fewer discussions and requests for MAiD, more than in urbanized areas. One non-Indigenous physician in a rural community recognized this as a challenge impacting her care of Indigenous patients. She explains, MAiD is against common spiritual beliefs of Indigenous Canadians, and that's caught me a little bit in not knowing how, because it's very comfortable place for me to discuss individually with somebody about MAiD as an option in the end of life planning. But I've been noticing I'm holding back at this point with opening that conversation with my First Nations patients because I don't feel grounded or educated in the underlying beliefs.
Physicians' concerns in remote communities. There are also practicalities of accessibility regarding the intervention of MAiD, such as the availability of practitioners in rural and remote areas. One physician acknowledged that this presented a double-edged sword. Northern doctors who go up north, they're not sure if it will be received well in the community, and it's something that they feel is not able to be provided in Northern First Nation communities. Non-Indigenous physicians believe that this might perpetuate colonial practices, such as forced sterilization, and it is an incredibly delicate topic in which largely non-Indigenous physicians are providing these services.
Indigenous parliamentarians brought unique perspectives to the assisted dying debate. Indigenous parliamentarians were instrumental in shaping the Trudeau government's cautious approach to medical assistance in dying. Traditionally, in Indigenous cultures, suicide never existed. In a debate with the Senate about Bill C-14, Robert Falcon Ouellette, Liberal MP in 2016 says, from the Indigenous perspective, ending one's life was not encouraged. In fact, it was discouraged. And there are teachings in my community, Ojibwe teachings, around whether or not you will be able to travel to the spirit world in the proper way, or a ceremony could not be done for you if you make the decision to end your life without good reason.
MAiD assessment and provision of services. Bill C-14 allows for the assessment of the eligibility for MAiD to be completed by two healthcare professionals, NPs and medical doctors. Bill C-14 requires patients to obtain two assessments, each by an NP or a physician who is independent of the other. Requiring two independent professional assessments is reasonable criteria. However, the feasibility of acquiring two assessments in the context of a rural setting where there is limited access to physicians is a concern. The legislation defines independent as requiring the following characteristics. One is not a mentor to the other or is not responsible for supervising their work. Two, they do not believe or know that they are a recipient of a financial or material benefit resulting from the individual's death. And three, they are not connected to the other practitioner or the requesting individual in any way that would affect their objectivity in the situation. In rural and remote communities, healthcare professionals tend to know each other well and often act in mentorship or supervisory roles for one another. They also are more likely to develop personal friendships with one another in these small communities, getting to know one another's families and travel in the same social circles. In such a rural context, ensuring that two eligible available healthcare professionals can effectively meet the criteria for independence itemized in Bill C-14 is likely to be more challenging proposition than it would be in the urban context.
This topic now brings us to the use of telemedicine in relation to MAiD. Bill C-14 does not address any requirements and methods for which professionals must perform their assessments for the eligibility of MAiD, meaning that the legislation does not state that these responsibilities must be performed in person. This gives the possibility of using telemedicine for MAiD as an option for those in rural and remote communities. Few would argue that a telemedicine assessment is a preferred option over one that is conducted in person. However, the Canadian healthcare system is becoming increasingly reliant on telemedicine options for those in these communities. Telemedicine has been successfully used for important and complex healthcare services, and it should be noted that incorrect use in many of its current practices can similarly be devastating. Given this modern perspective on the use of technology in healthcare, provinces are building in safeguards to protect their patients and healthcare providers.
Efforts in providing MAiD to remote communities. In addition to the use of telemedicine to help provide access to MAiD, some provincial health authorities are attempting to decrease the burden of access for individuals in rural and remote settings by establishing a centralized registry of providers willing to participate in MAiD. Additionally, policies have established a new role, the MAiD Care Coordinator, to assist patients and providers in coordinating the resources required for the provision of MAiD, such as arranging nursing support or assisting in the arrangements for a facility bed if needed, and arrange for emotional support for patients, families, and healthcare practitioners involved in MAiD. As additional consideration to rural and remote communities concerned with accessibility to MAiD, some provincial policies have stated their willingness to reimburse appropriate travel costs of healthcare practitioners involved in provision of MAiD.
In conclusion, Canada's government has taken many steps in increasing accessibility of MAiD to rural and remote communities. There are still many barriers to overcome. Thank you for listening.